Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to another episode of This Week in Creationism. Well, except it's been a while, so we'll call it This Month in Creationism. Yes, the beard has gotten longer and grayer in the time that I've been gone. Episode 71. So we got a whole month of stuff to talk about. Well, not a whole lot has happened in the world of young Earth creationism in the last month. It's been rather boring, in fact. But there are a few tidbits that we're going to cover. The biggie is Bodie Hodge, Ken Ham's son-in-law, been utterly scrubbed from the Answers in Genesis website. Now, he had already left a while back, but it seems like there's been a recent complete purge of all his materials from the Answers in Genesis site. So we need to talk about that a little bit. Nathaniel Jeanson from Answers in Genesis has reappeared with a new book. And Martin Niles, we've talked about him before and how he has left Answers in Genesis, but I just want to have a few words about his actions since leaving Answers in Genesis. And then a little bit about the whole dire wolf story and my prediction I made about how young Earth creationists would react to the dire wolf story. And I'm going to admit that I was wrong. All right, I made a prediction, and that prediction has failed. And that's probably a good thing. So let's get after it. You go to the Answers in Genesis website, type in Bodie Hodge, again, Ken Ham's son-in-law, and who is at one point some type of CEO at Answers, basically head of operations, I think, at Answers in Genesis. Big speaker, written dozens of books, participated in writing hundreds of articles, right? A huge contributor to Answers in Genesis. Now type in his name and hit search, and there's your result. No results. No results for Bodie Hodge. None at all. It's amazing. Now, it turns out that his name does appear on the Answers in Genesis website, which I think is interesting, especially in the store. There's still a few of his single author books that they have for sale there. Some of his books are gone, or at least they say they're not in stock anymore. And then there's a bunch of books like the Answers book series and so forth, or Answers for Teens, which he's a co-author on. And it does say that it was that he's one of the authors. So his name does appear on the store page. But if I select store and search in the store for his name, guess what the result is? No results found. So the search vehicle has been intentionally programmed to not yield any results if you search for Bodie Hodge. That seems like a very intentional thing. It's not like, you just have an engine that constantly updates all the terms and knows all the pages. Right now, you would use some kind of maybe an AI assisted thing in order to scour all your pages and then give you your search results back. Right. And that's not done with any intention. It's just like, hey, here's the results, and maybe they're rated or graded based on the popularity of the page, right? So it's bringing up the most popular item for that particular search term. But for it to tell you that there are no results, okay, when I know that his name is mentioned on pages that Answers in Genesis, tells me that they have gone in and intentionally said that we do not want to return any results for that particular name, for those particular words. I've typed in Hodge by itself, and I've typed in Bodie by itself, and neither word appears. All right. Neither word gives you a search result. So that's what I say. Bodie Hodge is gone. Not persona non grata at Answers in Genesis. And I do not have any, behind the scenes story here. I do not know what's happened. Bodie Hodge has not talked about it. There's no rumors out there. Now, we do know that he left right around the same time that Martin Niles came in. It's not a wild stretch to think that Bodie Hodge, it's not a wild stretch to think that that's some kind of power play type of thing, right? Bodie Hodge could have been in a position where he thought he would end up with more control as Ken Ham was in his waning years. And then they go out and they find this Australian with the correct accent to run the Answers in Genesis. They bring him in all the way from Australia, even though he doesn't have a creation science background and does not really very familiar with young Earth creationism. And basically install him as the heir apparent to Ken Ham. And so we don't know what friction that caused. We have seen a fair amount of turnover at Answers in Genesis, which is to be expected in any organization. When you have a large turnover at the top, you're going to have turnover below that as you have a new vision installed. Of course, the thing with Martin Iles, I'm a little ahead of myself because I was going to talk about Martin Iles later, but Martin Iles only lasted around a year, and really in terms of being on campus, on site, seems like he was only there for maybe 6 months. And so he had a quick ramp up of like articles, and he did a video series, and he appeared with Ken Ham. And then he tailed off, significantly. And so it was apparent for the last couple months, not apparent until the word actually came out. But if you go back in retrospect and you look at the, I start thinking about like, oh yeah, what are the videos? What did he do? It was a very much, fell off a cliff, all right, a couple months before the announcement that he was no longer involved in Answers in Genesis. And so now Answers in Genesis is in a situation where they are still reliant on Ken Ham as the face of the organization, and no indication of what's going to happen next. So I think tumultuous times, okay, I'm going to say the word, tumultuous times at Answers in Genesis. So let me go back to Bodie Hodge. He has his own website called Biblical Authorities Ministries. He has started his own ministry called Biblical Authority Ministries, BAM, which is a blogger website, and he has been publishing articles there. Most of those articles are just repeats of stuff that he had at the Answers in Genesis website. So for example, here, you'll see it says, originally here, Answers in Genesis, Creationism, Young Earth, are biblical creationists divisive? That was a very strong article that he had published at one time. And so that article he just published on his own blog just a couple days ago. But now he says originally here, I copied that particular link out and I pasted it into a web window. And what did I get? I got nothing but a redirect to a basic page on Answers in Genesis website. That's true for many of his other blog posts. He's saying like, here's where the article, was originally published, and that link no longer works. Doesn't go to Answers in Genesis. How long ago did this happen? So Bodie Hodge has been out of Answers in Genesis for about a year. When did this article disappear? I wondered about that. And so I looked for a couple articles that I knew were like classic Bodie Hodge articles, ones that I've referenced before in the past. One of those is this one right here, which I suddenly realized, wow, maybe it's not on the Answers in Genesis website anymore. 6,000 years or 10,000 years, doesn't matter. I love this article because it really showed the extremities that Young Earth Creationist literalism goes to. If you follow Young Earth Creationist thought, logically, you're going to end up where Bodie Hodge does in this particular article. And growing up, it was always like, yeah, the Earth could be 6,000 to 10,000 years old. There's some wiggle room in there. In this article, he argues, no, it is 6,000 years old. And if you say it's 10,000 years old, you're bordering on heretic, right? You're allowing evolution to influence you and all this. Like 10,000 is way too long. There's no room for that kind of wiggle room because you have to interpret the scripture in this particular way. All right, so that article has always intrigued me. And so I want to know, and sure enough, it wasn't there. I searched for it, and it's no longer on the Answers in Genesis website. And it's been there for years and years and years. And I've gone back to it many times. And so it's like, oh no, it's gone. Like, what am I going to do? Because I'd like to reference that. So here you can see, you probably can't read it. It's in little tiny text up here, but this is the Wayback Machine. So I searched for that web address based on Bodie Hodge's republishing of the article, right, on his blog and showing what the web address was at Answers in Genesis. And I believe that it existed when he published that on his blog post. And so I searched for that web address, And I found the most recent scan of the Answers in Genesis website that recorded this particular website was in November of 2024. All right, I'm talking today in May of 2025, so we're only 5 months out from that. And so 5 months ago, this page existed, and that was 6 months after Bodie Hodge had left. So I don't know when this happened, but it appears that this purge of Bodie Hodge stuff on Answers in Genesis website, it doesn't matter whether it completely fits the Answers in Genesis viewpoint, right? Most of his articles are not going to be they're just standard young earth creationist stuff, right? There's nothing he said in there that is like, oh, well, we didn't like what he said there. It is just a removal of everything that is Bodie Hodge. Quite shocking, really. So here's Biblical Authority Ministries, and I'm going to toss in one little extra detail about Bodie Hodge, which will only matter to a few of you out there, but I know there's a couple people in my audience that this will be a little bit of a trigger for. And maybe you will also remember, if you know the history of Answers in Genesis, that they have purged individuals like Bodie Hodge before. Back when Ken Ham first started Answers in Genesis, he had a vice president type position, and there was a couple other people involved, and they got pushed out of Answers in Genesis. And one of the reasons they got pushed out is because of a difference in basically, well, probably apologetic methods, different ideas about how to spread the gospel through young earth creation science. And part of that reason is because they differ in their apologetics. And here is Bodie Hodge saying, which I had never really heard him talk about much before, but on his about page, on his new blog, he says this. He's married with 4 children. He is a reconstructionist and a known presuppositionalist. This shows in his response style. Right? Presuppositionalism. That's not the thing that is terribly problematic. There's probably a mixture of presuppositionalist and sort of like evidentialist apologists at Answers in Genesis. They have kind of a weird mix of trying to apply both of those types of apologetics. I shouldn't say weird. They use a mix of both apologetic methods in their ministry. It's the reconstructionist part, right? It's the reconstructionist, post-millennial probably eschatology, right? Which very much says something about his end times view, his view of the world and history, which is probably at odds, given his background, his church background, at odds with really Ken Ham. Despite him being Ken Ham's son-in-law, he seems to be completely excluded from the ministry, from the Answers in Genesis ministry, and was left with basically nothing. But you wrote this stuff and you can republish it on your blog. But this is a tiny, tiny blog, a tiny ministry. I can't imagine that it has hardly any followers at all. I actually feel a little bad for Bodie Hodge. I found him to be one of the most engaging and fun speakers that Answers in Genesis had. He's one of the few people there that I thought I could have a really interesting conversation with Bodie Hodge. It would be fun. We would disagree, and we would have a good time doing it. We could have a conversation, whereas I know I couldn't have a conversation with a number of other people there. Moving on. Okay, I already talked about Martin Iles. Here he is being presented as the leader of that. Now, Martin Iles is also semi-scrubbed from the Answers in Genesis website. All right, he's been a bunch of stuff's been removed about his position, but interestingly, like the video that introduces him, an article by Ken Ham welcoming him there and introducing him as the new CEO, all that still exists. If you go to his profile, it just mentions that he wrote, because they still have a couple of his videos, and they still talk about him, and like his background. But it doesn't talk about him being part of the ministry anymore. So they did they did go through and whitewash a bunch of stuff. You're going to do that. That's nothing wrong with that. That's like just to be expected in that kind of leadership transition. But here's what I found intriguing. Right when he left, like day after he left, and it was announced that he was no longer with Answers in Genesis, I went to the Answers in Genesis website, and they had, Ken Ham really never said anything about this. He never really made an announcement. This was all done by like a third party that did a video and talked about it, and was just kind of like, okay, the word's out there now. And Ken Ham, I've followed him on Facebook and X and other places, and he's never really acknowledged it. He's never come out straight up and talked about it. And then there wasn't an announcement on the Answers in Genesis website. I mean, maybe there was weeks and weeks later, and I missed it. But I've searched for it. I don't see it. So you're wondering, what is this in front of you right now? This is their little chat bot, right? Their new AI powered chat bot. And so I asked this question: what is Martin Iles' position at Answers in Genesis? I asked this the day after he was not there anymore. And here was its response. After much prayer and consideration by all parties, we announce that Martin Iles' time at Answers in Genesis has come to an end. Martin is expecting to pursue new ministry opportunities from his homeland in Australia. As we reflect, actually, he's looking to stay in the United States. He's been talking about that a lot and trying to start a new ministry here in the United States, having to do with something about Christian education, not young earth creationism. As we reflect on the past 2 years, we're all grateful for the many connections made, friendships formed, and fruitful ministry opportunities during the season. We continue in mutual prayer support for each other and for objectives of each other's respective ministries. Founder CEO Ken Ham adds, Martin is a gifted communicator of biblical truth, and AIG is grateful for his contributions to the ministry and its mission. I pray the Lord continues to, help him along his way. So, of course, this has to be a massive disappointment to Ken Ham, in the sense that, I mean, he was set up to be his successor, right? This is going to be Martin Iles is going to be the successor to Ken Ham. That was pretty clear. And to have him suddenly gone means something happened. And I've been following Martin Iles since then, right, on various social media platforms, and he has been pretty active. And he's very bold. But interestingly, he is not, because he's not from the U.S., he has a little different perspective on U.S. politics. He's very conservative, of course, but he's critical of Trump. He has said a bunch of things that show me that he does not just fall in line with the usual culture war, automatically going to certain tropes and arguments. He is definitely a little more nuanced. And I do wonder whether that, kind of led to, when we got involved in Answers in Genesis and saw the type of people that he had to deal with, and also the fact that they're getting pretty close to being involved a lot more in politics. Ken Ham has hung out with various, lobbyists and so forth. And so I'm not sure. And although Martin Iles is no stranger to politics, he's been very involved in politics in Australia. I'm not sure he really, was ready for what American politics was like. And I think he does see real problems with, Christian nationalism and other things, and other ways that Christians have embraced certain political parties and ideas. And so what I'll say is, it's hard to shoehorn him into like this. He's just this type, right? Whereas Ken Ham and others, they just like, it's really easy to know exactly what they're going to think about everything. Martin Iles he'll just call out stuff that are, some of those are like, it's like, boy, you shouldn't be touching that. You're going to get yourself in trouble. And so maybe there's a little of that just kind of grew over time, and he realized that it's just not going to be a fit at Answers in Genesis at some point. And his real calling is this educational stuff, Christian education stuff he wants to do, and multimedia stuff. And I think he really wants to get involved in AI stuff, which I think was, there was a push toward talking about using AI at Answers in Genesis once he arrived. Oh, so now you're wondering, why do I have two copies? It's like, why are there two copies of the exact same response? I forgot to say, I asked the chatbot this question right after he left, and I was shocked by the answer because it's not on the website. In other words, you're using but the chatbot is different than a search, right? The search engine is like searching like all the pages and saying like, here's where you can find this information. The chatbot is here is stuff that they've trained, sort of like, here's all the information it's provided, and it's an AI response to a question that I've asked, and I got this very specific answer, which, well, I wondered, well, where did the answer come from? Because it's not come from any public material. And so that was kind of interesting, that this chatbot gave me a completely different, like, here's a very specific response coming from a question for which I did not have any other information. And so this was like, I don't remember Ken Ham saying it. I don't remember anyone at Answers in Genesis actually saying any of this stuff. So now what's on the other side is an exact duplicate. However, this is what I did just yesterday. Okay, and so this was months later, right? 3 months later, I asked the exact same question to the chatbot, and I got exactly the same answer, which tells me something. If it was just AI, large language module, sorry, I keep saying module, large language model, it shouldn't be coming up with exactly the same words again. So I think that this is something that was actually put into the system again intentionally. Anytime Martin Iles is mentioned, maybe something like this is like the output. So I really can't fully explain why the exact duplicate 3 months apart response. But again, you do the search engine and you search for something like this, you will find nothing like this. You'll find no statement about Martin Iles being CEO and leaving Answers in Genesis. But the chatbot is completely familiar with that idea. So let's quickly take a look at a few other things that have been happening. Here's Ken Ham on April 25th. It's DNA Day, and creationists are leading the way in new research. Right? It's National DNA in the US because on this day, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the helical structure of DNA, and creationists are leading the way. They're leading the way in DNA research. How? What does he mean? What is Answers in Genesis doing to lead the way in the new frontiers of DNA research? Well, Dr. Jeanson has a brand new book. It's now available for pre-order, and it highlights his fascinating research over the last year. He's been consumed, like absolutely consumed, with Native American ancestry. And he's written a whole book on that. They Had Names, Tracing the History of North American Indigenous People. This is what he's been doing for the past year. Nathaniel Jeanson is a full-time employee of Answers in Genesis, and I and others have always tried to figure out what exactly he does. I mean, I understand this is a lot of work, but this is just barely kind of touches on the fringe of young earth creationism. I mean, there really isn't an interesting story here in my mind. And I'm probably not going to find out if there's an interesting story there, because this is a book I'm not going to buy. I mean, I've bought his previous books and done review of them, but this just doesn't even interest me at all. And besides, he's done a few videos that kind of explored things, and he's as wrong as he was before about his Y chromosome stuff. And so I don't expect that there's going to be anything new or interesting in this book. And so I'm not really going to, book. And his second book was a lot less popular than his previous one, Replacing Darwin. And so I think this book is it's just there as like a personal pet project. And it gives Ken Ham a chance to say, look, I've got a PhD from Harvard on my staff, and he's doing really important work. Like he's what was it here? He's leading the way in new research. That's a stretch, a little bit of a stretch to say. Let's move on to Institute for Creation Research. And all we have to say about Institute for Creation Research is, yawn. I have not found anything interesting on this web page for a couple months now. It's there's just not a lot happening there. It's a lot of repeats of the same old stuff and really simple, very, very simple, like responses to science stories. I'm rarely intrigued by anything there. That's the thing. The new creation blog, sometimes Answers in Genesis, at least they ask some provocative questions, and it allows me it gives me something, it stimulates my thinking. There's nothing stimulating about the Institute for Creation Research. It's just like time to move on. So, oh yeah, why did I actually put this page together? I can't remember how these three things are related to each other. When I did this, there was some kind of relationship. Right now, I can't remember what that is. But up here in the upper right, in their Answers research journal, Dr. Carter from Creation Ministries International, who I was talking about before, and talking about their, I'll call it academic credibility. Dr. Carter's written a very, I think, very good, solid response and critique of Jeanson's book Traced, which is his second book. And so here they published it in that journal, but of course when they publish it, they also allowed Jeanson to write a response at the very same time. So they're like back-to-back articles. That is an article, Carter's article is very well worth reading. I mean, he really finds some faults that many other people have found with Traced, but again, it's from a creationist perspective, right? This is a young earth creationist critiquing other young earth creationist work, which I think is much more effective than, say, my critique of Nathaniel Jeanson's book Traced. And what's really funny about, I think I remember why the connection between the different things on this page right here is that Nathaniel Jeanson does a classic Nathaniel Jeanson thing, right, in his response to Carter. He claims that Carter hasn't read his work. He claims he hasn't read or understood his book, or more particularly, you haven't read my papers, because in my papers I explain all this stuff. And he says this multiple times in what is his usual flair, very, very long response. And he constantly seems to be indignant and upset that Carter hasn't read his work. The assumption is, well, if you've read my work, then you would understand it, in which case you'd agree with it. Right? But he tries to take all of Carter's things and say, oh, you simply didn't understand, or you simply didn't know my work. And that's what Jeanson is always has said about me as well, in my critiques of him. It's like, well, you didn't read my articles. Yes, I have read all those. You could claim that I didn't understand them, but you have to take a little bit of that on yourself too. Yes, maybe I was incapable of understanding some of your arguments, but at the same time, you also might not have been clear enough in how you explain something. Also, his articles are extremely verbose, and so it is rather difficult to maintain your concentration as you read, the same thing over and over and over again. So I find it kind of humorous that Jeanson uses the same kind of rhetorical method against Dr. Carter that he does against me in his response to him. Okay, so now I've remembered why I actually put this screenshot of doing a Google search on myself, right? So I searched for Joel Duff, and this is what you currently get with Google's been changing its format lately. So it shows my YouTube videos, a profile of me, and so forth. But the point is that everything in the top hit list, even if I go to even if I open up Google and I turn my own account off, all right, or I'm on another computer, and I search for me, I get this is all stuff about me. And so I'm top 10 with all the responses now. And it hasn't always been the case. There's another Joel Duff out there in Canada that has a relatively prominent position, has written a bunch of stuff on the ecology and the environment. So, but this isn't here to promote me. Here's the point I want to make about this is that, and this is why it's related to Jeanson. I don't know how many times it's happened that I have been in a protracted discussion, back and forth in like a comment section on either my own YouTube channel, right, or my blog, or more commonly on Facebook, on X, Blue Sky, other places, right? And I'll have people who just have no idea who I am, right? And they accuse me of being all kinds of things. It's like, well, you believe this or you say this based on like the, 7 or 8 words that I said. They jump to conclusions. And he's like, well, who is this Joel Duff? I mean, what are his qualifications? I mean, this is just some guy. He's just on here yapping his mouth off. And who can actually trust him or know know anything about him? And then often I'll post my, I'll copy my joelduff.org, which is my like personal like about me page that I have website, which I think is, yeah, well, actually that's the first hit now. I just realized that that's the first thing that comes up. That's not what used to occur, but that's actually a relatively recent page that I created. So I'm kind of glad to see that it's the #1 hit for searching for myself now. And, so I'll post that, and it's pretty clear that they don't even look at it. They don't look at the link, and they just go on talking about me. It just like whenever I'm in a conversation with somebody, I mean, I am always trying to search and find out more about someone so I know what their motivations are, what their background is, who they are, because I don't trust myself to understand somebody from 2 sentences that they wrote on social media. This just happens so often. The most outrageous case of this is there is a YouTube channel out there by a young Earth creationist YouTuber who has done multiple videos about me, right? Big, thumbnails with me looking crazy and critiquing me, talking about me. And then he knows nothing about me. Right? He's watched some of my videos. I don't think all of them, certainly. I mean, little bits and pieces of videos. Right? And he's gone into critiquing, and he starts out his video talking about, who is this Joel Duff? I don't know who he is. It's like, here's this, the person saying this stuff. What are his credentials? I'm like, seriously? Really? You can't spend 1 minute doing a Google search on me? It's fine. Search for me. Here's all kinds of stuff about me. Do a little research. It's okay to do your own research for this. Right? I am not some secret person. He and several other people act like I'm like trying to be I'm trying to hide behind anonymity. Does this look anonymous to you? Does this look like I'm afraid to let people know who I am? And then I'm not saying everything about it. See, they want me to like go into a long description about who I am. Like, hey, you tell me who you are. It's like, I don't know who you are. You tell us who you are. But why should I write all that out? You can do a quick Google search and find out about me. Just like that. Tons of information, more than you ever would want to know. And you can very quickly find out the basic, most important things you need to know about me. Right? You can know about what I do in my personal life. You can find out what I do professionally, and you can find out about, another important aspect of my life, which is my faith, right? All 3 of those, very public, right there in your face. So during my 7 weeks of exile from YouTube, and I don't mean exile because like they exiled me. It's my own self-imposed, like, I'm not going to make YouTube videos for a while thing. And because I'm working on other projects and I just needed to focus on that. And I was getting too wrapped up in the YouTube thing. You kind of just need to take a little break and ask yourself, like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? Maybe getting a little bit overly dramatic, as people are prone to do when they make YouTube videos. And so during that time, this dire wolf story came out. And so it would have been prime for me to talk about it, but I decided, no. I've told myself I'm not going to make videos, so I'm going to resist. I did do a radio interview a couple days after it came out. And so in doing that radio interview, I ended up having to do a bunch of research on it so I'd know what I was talking about. But one of my main points was just about how terrible this story was from a science communication perspective. About how this is not a dire wolf. It just isn't. They didn't make dire wolves. They changed, as I said to the radio host, I said something like, you and I differ at probably, a million different locations in our genome. We have a million different base pairs. And if I were to go in and change 20 of your base pairs to be like mine, I don't think that you would suddenly become me. Right? We're a whole lot more different than those 20 base pairs. Those 20 base pairs could be in relative. You could take the 20 that you think are the most important, and you could change a couple characteristics, but we're not anywhere close to making a dire wolf from a gray wolf. However, and so what I had predicted was, I had made this prediction. I said, this story is going to be one where creationists come in and they say, like, see, right? We knew they were the same kind, right? Dire wolves, gray wolves. You can easily change one into the other. And that's just more proof that, there were only two dogs on the ark and they got off the ark and they could have easily have just mutated, easily have been, had their gene pools separated into different sets. And then that would create all these different species really rapidly. So it would fit very much with the hyper-speciation thing. And you can see from this headline right here on a Facebook group, the dire wolf, proof that kinds only bring forth their own kind. And so again, like, hey, see, these are all the same kind of thing. So a little bit of that was there, but what most creationists did was they did this. No, they're not dire wolves. Here's Todd Wood saying, like, it's not even close. Right? This is not changing. He's recognizing there is fundamentally more differences there than simply those 20 changes. And making a tweak to a couple morphological features doesn't completely alter what species it is. And so I was wrong. I thought the younger creationists might really get into this thing. But I think what happened is that the story came out. Everyone's talking about, they made a dire wolf, right? And because it was a very popular story. But this is one case where the scientific establishment really pushed back hard, right? I did, others did. Like, this is not appropriate to be calling these dire wolves based on a few gene edits. And that story actually gained traction and became a story itself. The story about how this was an overblown story by this company, Colossus Bioscience. Right. And that they overplayed their hand in terms of what they had done. All right. Became a story in itself. And all younger creationists saw that. And they had to recognize that, this is not something that we want to use as proof that dire wolves and gray wolves can easily be made by just making a couple changes. And so it didn't really help out the hyper-speciation sort of hypothesis of young earth creationists like I thought it might. I thought it might become the poster child for young earth creationists to say how, look, it's just really easy to change one species into another as long as they're in the same kind of organism. Well, that's it. That's my brief catch up on this month in creationism. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.